All right, great to be back. Good to see everybody. It's middle of November and it's the grind of the season, but I got to tell you, very, very excited about this opportunity this week to go on the road and play a meaningful SEC game in a hostile environment. This is why you coach. I got a text last night from one of my former assistants who reminded me that 10 years ago we had beaten a nationally ranked Toledo team on election night in Maction on the road at Toledo, and that was a great win for us, for the Ball State Cardinals back in that day. And I probably had about 8 layers of clothes on for that game, and here we are. Clayton and I were actually just talking about it going out to practice this morning, about how special these opportunities are to coach in these big-time games. So very excited about that. This is going to be a huge challenge for our team in general and for our special teams specifically. Florida's got a lot of really impressive-looking athletes. I saw that firsthand last year. You see it on film this year. They've got some really talented, dangerous returners. They've got some experienced specialists. And you can tell that they put an emphasis on special teams. And that goes back to watching the Louisiana Lafayette stuff, which I've done a lot of. You could see the carryover from what they were doing there. Billy Napier and I go back a long ways. So my first year as a head coach at Lehigh, we actually played Furman in the second round of the playoffs when Billy was the quarterback there. And that Furman team went on to the national championship game that year. That was Bobby Johnson's last year. And then he moved on to Vanderbilt, but Billy was the quarterback on that team. So I've known him and spoken to him off and on since that time. Have a lot of respect for him. And the Furman and the Lehigh programs back in that day were two of the sort of FCS powerhouses on the East Coast, had similar kids, had been in the playoffs a lot, so there was a really close connection between those programs and the coaches at those two places. Beyond the challenges that Florida presents, and I know Shane has updated you guys on some of our bumps and bruises, that presents its own challenge for us internally as we get ready for this game and get ready for this home stretch here in November. So a lot of people think about the depth chart as it relates to offense and defense. Okay, this guy's starting or this guy moves into a starting role, so on and so forth. They don't always think about how it affects special teams. Reagan used to talk about trickle-down economics. We have our own sort of trickle-down when it comes to the depth chart in special teams. And so what happens is if a guy who was playing 40 or 50 snaps earlier in the season on offense or defense is now playing 60, 70, 80 snaps, that obviously has an impact on our special teams depth, and you have to be a little bit more selective about where you might use him. You might have to take a more experienced guy out of the lineup and insert somebody who's a little bit more green at this point in the season. So we constantly work on developing our guys. Everybody's always involved in drills over the course of the season. I'm always trying to keep people on their toes in meetings and so forth, that they have to be ready when they're called upon, when their opportunity comes. But this is when the rubber hits the road relative to that. So you have to go with what you've got. You have to get the guys ready that you can. You have to be thoughtful about what they can do and make the best of it and figure out a way to make it work. So confident that those guys will step up, and there may be a few new faces here and there on some of our units, and we gotta make sure those guys are ready to go. We've definitely had our moments on special teams this year. The Vanderbilt game last week was no exception to that, but I still feel like we are inconsistent at times, and I still feel like there are times when we are not playing with as good of a feel for the game and how things are developing over the course of a play as we could be and should be. So we have to keep striving for that. We have to keep pushing for that. We have to keep demanding that and have a sense of urgency moving forward every day and every week. I'll give you one little analogy. So in 2014, Jen and I went to a concert by The Who. They were doing a tour, and this was roughly 50 years after they started as a band. And I watched Pete Townsend. He's always been one of my favorite guitar guys. And I watched him do his signature jump in that concert. And I thought to myself, he's probably not getting quite as high off the ground as he did back in the 60s, but it was the same jump. And then it was the same windmill move with his arm and the guitar, right? And so there was a consistency there. There was you knew what to expect. You had a peace of mind that Pete Townsend hadn't changed after 50 years, and he was going to be consistent. He was going to play with an edge. He was going to have an attitude about what he did, and we need to keep working towards that because we're not quite 2 years into this yet. It's still very much a work in progress, but we want to win. We want to win now. We want to have success now. So we've got to walk that fine line between understanding where we're at in the process, but still keeping our expectations really high. We want to produce great albums like Who's Next, right, and not be one-hit wonders. So with that said, I'll open it up to you guys and look forward to your questions.
Pete, a couple for you. One, has Kai gotten to the point where he's coming to you at times on the sideline and say, "Coach, let's run this. I think I can make it happen"? And two, did they play squeeze box that night?
Oh, very good. It was the Quadrophenia tour. So 5:15 and a couple of those other songs they played for sure, but I'm not sure if Squeezebox made an appearance or not. I know Roger Daltrey kept unbuttoning buttons to his shirt as the night went on to impress the ladies that he was 70-something and still in pretty good shape. But relative to Kai, I will say this. Kai and the rest of the guys, they're on board with what we're doing, and they're excited about what we're doing. And I think we're at a point where they look forward to what are we going to have for them this week. And some of the aggressive plays, they don't always understand necessarily the timing of some of those and when it's appropriate and when it's not. That's all part of their education as players. But I do think they're excited about what we're doing, and it's nice to have some guys like Kai and Tonka that you can have great confidence in, that if you put them in the right position, that they're going to be ball players and make plays. And certainly both those guys did the other night.
Pete, you mentioned they might not understand timing. As a special teams guy, I know fronts and looks might dictate some of it, but when do you decide to pull the trigger and say, okay, we're going to try this fake here, this fake there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a feel to everything, right? As coaches, you're always trying to balance some of the analytics that you might look at, whether that be before the game or in the game, and then there's just a feel to things. And I think Shane's got a really good feel for that. I've mentioned in here before just his growth and development as a head coach from last year to this year, and his demeanor on the sidelines and so forth. He's still got an incredible energy level, but he's really, really plugged in. And we have a lot of conversations during the week. We have a lot of conversations as coordinators to make sure the three of us are on the same page. And obviously those conversations continue right up until the very end of the game.
Sticking with the fake field goal, is that something you install in the spring? Is it something that goes in the fall? Is it game week? Kind of what goes into actually getting that in and I guess kind of deciding when to bust it out? Not to ask the same question, but how do you kind of install that?
Well, you're always looking at what your players can do. You never want to ask a player to do something that is not within his skill set. And so sometimes you may have an idea, but you're also thinking about the guys that you have, and are you fairly asking them to do something that they can execute? So going back to the first game, Kai was likely going to be out for the first game, and we trained multiple holders, and we were fortunate that Hunter Rogers was able to hold, Matt was able to snap, and we were able to execute a really, really important field goal fake early in that game, which didn't score, but it got a first down and set up a score. Obviously, this last one was a throw by Kai. So you're always looking for opportunities, and if an opportunity presents itself, do we have something that can take advantage of that at the right time? And it's I can't stand up here and claim to be some former offensive guru, but I do have an offensive background, and so you're always looking at the big picture and how can you attack a certain defense, a certain front, a certain coverage, and then what can be complementary off of those things, and what can you call at the right times, and so special teams, I tell you this often, it's offense and defense with more time and space. There's a bigger field that you're utilizing, and then the other big difference is there are no second and third downs for me, for us, for special teams, right? So when the guys sometimes wonder why I'm so demanding, it's only because if on offense you gain 1 yard on a run, okay, it's 2nd and 9. Let's have another play call. For us, if we don't execute that fake field goal the other night, there's a huge swing in momentum in that game, because now Vanderbilt takes over on a drive that we moved to the red zone and we didn't get any points. All right, but if we do execute that play and we can walk away with a touchdown instead of a field goal, I mean, all you had to do was look at the Vanderbilt sideline after we completed that pass to Tonka the other night, and in my opinion, it really took a lot of wind out of their sails, not to use a Navy analogy with the Commodores, but there's no question that I think it did that. And watching the film the next day from the tight shot, I looked over there and there was just a deflation on their sideline after we executed that play. So they do carry a lot of weight, but there's also great consequences if you don't execute.
Pete, you mentioned going through some of the analytics, and I know there's the percent chance of you winning a game if you block a field goal or block a punt go up astronomically, but if you execute a fake field goal, is there data on that to where if you execute a fake punt or a fake field goal, the win percentage goes up?
I know there's data about getting punts blocked and your chances of win if you get one blocked or if you block one. I don't know if some of that stuff goes so deep. But one nice thing about those analytics guys is that even if they don't provide you with something weekly, generally you can ask them, and maybe that's something they could give you in the off season. I'm not a great numbers guy. My son's a better numbers guy, and my analyst Stanton Weber is a phenomenal numbers guy. He's got an accounting background, so I defer to him on a lot of that stuff and just say, hey, give me the numbers on this. I want to know this, But that is great stuff that it's just available. A lot of times you have a hunch. It's almost like, I've told you my dad was a police officer. You have an instinct, you have a hunch about something intuitively, and then you try to go back to the numbers and say, can I be validated with what I'm watching by what the numbers tell us?
Pete, this might be a little general, but I mean, as far as guys you've had, how good of a passer is Kai Kroger?
Yeah, he's really good. The best specialists I've ever had are regular guys. They're just, and I've said this to you before, they're the guys you want to hook up with in 10 years at a beach bar somewhere and tell stories and have an adult beverage, right? Jack Fox, who I had the pleasure to coach for 1 year at Rice, who's now an all-pro punter and just got a huge contract from the Lions. The amazing thing about Jack is we would sit there and watch film, and I'd say, do you think you can do this? And if you can't, it's okay. And he'd be like, yeah, we can get that done. Let's go out and mess around with it today. and he just had that ability and that confidence about him. And he had a regular guy, athletic background. He was a high school quarterback who picked up punting and kicking while he was in high school. And Kai's got a lot of that too. He's just super even keeled. You know, I could get hot during practice about something, and which occasionally I do, and he just doesn't blink. In fact, he kind of like, all right, you know, you're hot about this, but he's not going to be up and down because of that. And it's actually sort of a good litmus test for him, you know, if I get fired up about something, because, all right, can he stay consistent even though, you know, I might be a little bit more reserved here and a little bit more fired up about something here. And it really goes for the whole group, because that's what our guys have to do, right? They have to be able to do their job despite crowd noise, despite it's this kind of turf versus that kind of turf, or the wind's blowing here, or, you know, the pregame meal at the hotel was this and not that, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, none of that stuff matters. Just go do it. And Kai is got that confidence about him, that even-keeled nature about him. And I don't think we talk enough about what a fabulous holder he is, because he's really done some incredible things there, and obviously he's punted the ball well here the last couple weeks.
Do you think at this stage of the season, with what you guys have done with your special teams, that you're in the heads of your upcoming opponents to the point where they're spending more time focusing on that aspect of the Gamecocks? And in some ways, is that already a victory for what you do with special teams?
I can't answer that question, but what I can tell you is that's the goal. That's the goal, to create sleepless nights for people, and to hopefully make them make some hard decisions about practice time and meeting time. And so I'll give you an old movie reference. One of my favorite old war movies was Von Ryan's Express, Frank Sinatra and Trevor Howard. And Trevor Howard is a British colonel, and he says to Sinatra, he says, "I once told you, Von Ryan, if only one gets out, it's a victory," meaning an escape from a POW camp. And so, you know, if we are able to cause some concern and some consternation, is that an appropriate word? I feel like I'm taking the SAT in here today. If we can do that during the week before the game even starts, yes, to a degree, that is a victory.
I think angst and consternation might be an appropriate way to describe that.
Angst.
Yeah.
I like that. Torian Gray actually has a really, really good vocabulary. And so from time to time, we like to throw those kind of words back and forth across the staff table. So I'll remind him, or I'll bring that up with him today.
I like to keep mine around like 4 or 5 letters.
I like it.
Put too many in there. But with some of the true freshmen, you might have alluded to this a little earlier, but any of those true freshmen who have had smaller roles or not really a role at this point in the season, any guys who could be close to helping you guys and trying to fill out those special teams depth?
Yeah, one guy I'm pushing to get ready, and I think he's got a really bright future, is Stone Blanton. He's playing some at linebacker, so he's at a point now where he's played in most of the games this season. He's had a little bit more limited role on special teams. He's been on the depth, but hasn't played as much in games on special teams. And he's a guy that's sharp mentally. He's instinctive, and he's a guy that I'm trying to gently nudge along here to try to get him ready down the stretch. Brian Thomas is another guy who's played some the last 3-4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks on defense, and he's been on some special teams snaps, not a ton, but he's making progress, and he understands the sense of urgency that's needed to contribute. So I would just say this, whether they're young guys like those two or even somebody who's been around here a long time, I'm always looking for creative ways to get the job done and to involve as many guys as possible and give them a role. So it may be one player that hasn't played a lot in recent weeks, but you have a particular role on a particular unit that suits him and suits his skill set, and you're looking to plug him in, and he's got to understand and appreciate how important that role is for this specific week, if I could spit that out.
Pete, you mentioned about having a feel, a hunch for when to call plays. The fake punt, 10-point game, they just scored. It's getting kind of close there, and it was 4th and 5. What did you see, or what hunch did you say this is, we're going to call this and this is going to work?
The fake field goal? Yeah. So we had anticipated a certain look, and we're hoping that earlier in the game we might see what we were hoping to see, and then we were pretty confident calling it at that point. Ironically, and nothing ever does, play out exactly the way you think it will. And the way it turned out, we thought the second guy from the edge was going to rush the D gap. Instead, he was wider, and Tonka ended up releasing inside him instead of outside of him. And if you watch the film closely, the guy grabs his face mask and about yanks Tonka's head back. So that restricted him getting out. But Tonka did a great job prying through there and getting the width he needed. And Kai was able to take a little bit off the throw and put a little bit more air under it, even though the guy had pretty tight coverage. It was an interesting play because there were several potential penalties that could have been called there. They called one. They probably could have called at least one or two others. So the way it played out, we would have gotten a first down out of that, even if we didn't complete the pass. And as it turned out, we got half the distance to the goal line after it. There was a potential hand to the face on Nick Barrett there. One of their guys leveraged or kind of leaped over, put a part of his body on another Vanderbilt player and went over. And I think that's what they actually called right there on the side we ran the fake to.
That's what I was going to ask. The leveraging penalty, even if there wasn't an attempted kick, it could still be. I guess that's not allowed to do at any point.
Yeah, so you can't use one of your own players. You can leap if you're within a yard of the line of scrimmage, but if you use a part of another player on your own team's body to do it, that's a penalty. And like I say, I thought when I saw the flag, I thought I saw a hand to the face on Nick Barrett, who had been the left guard there by one of their interior guys. I saw the umpire drop the flag, and I thought for sure that's what he was calling. And then I guess you could argue there might have been a DPI on Tonka as well. So, but that's football, right? Sometimes stuff gets called, sometimes it doesn't, and those guys have a tough job too. Okay, awesome. Thanks, everybody. Good seeing you.